Today I am going to demonstrate granting pseudo privilege to a standard user in Debian 9.11. I believe that's called Stretch. All of the Debian distros are named for characters from the Toy Story franchise of Pixar animations. Other Other distros have other naming conventions, and some, frankly, have stopped using code names altogether. Say, for example, the 1804, or perhaps all of the 18.x release of Ubuntu is called Bionic Beaver. Fedora, the Fedora project, stopped using code names for their distro versions somewhere around version 20. I think the last version that had a name was, I think, 20, and it was called Heisenbug. Since then, it's just Fedora and the version number. I think the later versions, I think that the latest version of, now that I think about it, the latest version of Debian, I think, is 10. I can't remember its name. I think the version 8 was called Stretch. Or maybe 8 was Jesse and 9 is Stretch. Anywho, you can actually see that when you do apt-get update. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in. If you're looking at the GNOME lock screen, you kind of have to drag your click and hold and drag your lock screen up and unhide it. I discovered something funny this morning. I got my standard user and my standard root passwords backwards because I use the same two for all of these demonstration VMs. I just had to flip it because I tried the one and it didn't work. I tried the other, it didn't work. It finally occurred to me, oh wait, I reversed them. So that's one of the things I'm going to fix. This is the standard GNOME screen. I tend to install using GNOME because I do prefer it. Okay, so I need to. I've literally just started building this VM. And now when I say building, what I really mean is configuring for full function. It's obviously working. Setting up the VM in VMware is one thing. Getting it to do something is quite another. So the first thing I always do is find my terminal and add it to my favorites. Because for most of the things that matter, I prefer to use the command line. Now, there are a few things that it is actually a little harder to use the command line than the GUI. So let me flip this for maximum visibility. I'm going to go to the dark theme. Close there. That's better. So, and I'm also going to okay, no, not that. Keep the aspect ratio. So of course, now the first thing I have to do is to grant myself pseudo privilege. Now, this is not necessary in every Linux distro. In Ubuntu, your standard user is already part of the sudo group. In Kali, you're already part of the sudo group. What you should do before you kick this process off is just use the groups command. The groups command with no arguments will tell you what groups you're a member of. So groups and groups AMP are, oh, sorry, groups. These two commands are functionally equivalent. But if you want to be quite certain, you can give your own username. If you're not sure what your username is and it's not part of your prompt structure, just do who am I. And I guess it would help if you spelled who am I correctly. This command also works in a Windows NT environment. So if you're not sure what your username is on a Windows NT box, Windows 7, 8, 10, Server 2016, Server 2012, 2019, whatever. Say, for example, if you're in an Active Directory environment, but you're not honestly certain if you've got a local or an Active Directory login, you can use Who Am I? And it will tell you not only whether you're logged in locally or to the Active Directory, but what your username is. And that can have significant repercussions, because if you're logged into the Active Directory with an account which does not have administrative privileges on the local machine, there are things you can't do. Install software, make some kinds of updates, even change your own password. Well, actually, you probably can do that. Well, anyway, so what I'm going to do, so as I can see, I am in the AMP group. Every user has a group of his own name. What I do not see here is, now, depending on the distro in question, there are a couple of different names that might have root or administrative privileges. In the very old days, it was called the wheel group. Sometimes it's called the Sudo group, obviously a group of users who are allowed to invoke the sudo command, or the admin group, or the root group. Now, usually the root group belongs to the root user and only the root user, because as we've mentioned, every user has a group of his own name. Now, so what I'm going to do right now is actually I have to su to root, because I don't have sudo privilege right now. I can demonstrate that, though, with the which command. Actually, I can demonstrate this with apt-get. The first thing you have to do, before you can grant sudo privilege, you have to make sure that the sudo command is running. So let's cat etc sudoers. And now, if you can't read the sudoers file, okay, there is no sudoers file, so there's no sudo command installed. So obviously, I can't figure out if it's... Now, another thing, you could try reading etc password, etc shadow. Everyone can read etc password. Only the root user can read etc shadow. So if you can't find etc sudoers and you can't read etc shadow, it's almost certain that you don't have administrative privileges of any kind. So now I have to su to root. Now the first thing, now while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and change that password. Passwd will change your password. Enter. Now, so while I'm here, I'm gonna go whole hog and set the other one right as well. Okay, there. Now I can do apt get update. So yes, I'm using the stretch distro, and install sudo vim. Now, the reason I am doing sudo and vim at the same time is that the vi sudo command, which is what I want to use to change the contents of the sudoers file, will work with honestly will work, I think, with just about any text editor installed. Right out of the gate, Debian installs Nano, which is not bad, but I'm a VIM user from way back. By no means an expert, but it is my preferred distro. So when I prefer to, if I invoke vi sudo, I want to edit the sudoers file using vim. So I'm going to pause this for a minute because it's taking a while to read the database. Okay, and we're back. So I've installed sudo and vim. Notice also that when you use the su command to move into root, switch to user to root, you don't move from the directory that you're currently in. I'm still sitting in home/amp, which is my own home directory. If I wanted to be very certain I don't mess anything up, I can cd, actually I can click in here, cd, I'll go to my own home directory. The squiggle, of course, the tilde, is always your own home directory. pwd is /root. Root is so privileged that he has his own home directory, which is not in /home. So let's do vi sudo. There we go. Interesting. This should have invoked sudo using vim instead of nano. It's doing nano, but that's okay. So what we're going to do now is there's a couple different ways to handle this. You can either add a user to the user privilege specification, or you can add a user to the sudo group. What I'm going to do, because the AMP user is me, and I could safely do all of this as root. So there's this. Enter. So I'm going to Control-0 to write it out, Control-O to write it out, enter. Notice that you can change your format if you want, and Control-X and exit. So now the next, so let's do sudo etc sudoers, sudo cat etc sudoers. There, and I get the warning. Okay, so some distros will give you that 3-point warning. Some will just let you do sudo without any sort of warning. There's one other way to do this, so give me just a second. I'll set this up. Okay, so I have created a new user and a new group. The user's name is Phoenix. And now, the first thing I did, forgetting myself, was I tried to use the add user command without sudo privilege. Now, this is one of the things that differentiates some distros from others. In some distros, if you try to do something as you that you should have done as sudo, it'll say permission denied. In others, it'll say command not found. This is because of how they handle path modification. In this particular case, if you have a distro which gives everybody a path into sbin, you may try to invoke the command, but it doesn't work. So anyway, so I created a user named Phoenix for my dog, and I created a group called Woof, and then I added the user Phoenix to the group Woof. Now the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into vi sudo, and I'm going to add this group to sudo to give it sudo privilege. So let me edit that and come back to you. Okay, so I've got a new user, Phoenix. I've got a new group, Woof. I've added the group as a whole to my sudoers file. I could also add potentially the group sudo to the group Woof to the group sudo. The last thing I'm going to do is try to su to Phoenix, and then try to invoke something with sudo privilege. Okay, so I have got it working. There's one thing that I forgot to do. When I added the Woof group to sudoers, I forgot the % in front of the name of the group to indicate that, hey, this is a group. So I su to Phoenix, I provide my password, and it gives me incident not reported. Scary, scary. I even went so far as to try it. I logged into Phoenix on a separate console line graphically, tried it there to make sure that everything got instantiated, populated and instantiated correctly. Still no joy. And it occurred to me, wait a minute, there's a % sign missing. So I go back in, I add the % sign to the sudoers file. And of course, I have to do sudo. Like that. Sudo woof. Yeah, so you have to have that % sign. But it does work. So, okay, the last video got cut off a little bit, so I wanted to cover a few more. I mentioned the 3 warnings. You have them here at the top of the screen. Respect the privacy of others. There is very little that the root user cannot read on the system, including other people's files and other people's email. Think before you type. You can do things as root to completely destroy your system. For example, a recursive forcible removal of, you mean starting anywhere on the files tree, rm-rf star will recursively go down through the chain and go all the way up through the chain using the parent directory reference in every directory. Go all the way up to the root, nuke everything. Long before that happens, the system should destabilize itself because you'll be deleting files that are currently files that have file handles in memory, um, the executables of processes that are currently running, etc. With great power comes great responsibility. Proceed with caution whenever you are using sudo privilege. And this is why, while you, in some of the courses and instructions you may see in books and online and so on and so forth, they may tell you to su to root or log in as root and then just do a bunch of stuff. A bunch of stuff that you could just as easily do with sudo privilege. Now, the one thing you can't do with sudo privilege is, strangely enough, navigate the file tree. And this is true because things like the cd command are actually functions of bash. So if you do sudo cd something or other to get into a directory that only root can access, it won't work. So if you have to literally get into a directory that only the root can get into, say for example say someone has decided to lock down some section of the etc directory hard, so that only root can access it and only as the root user. So it's read, write, execute for the root user and no privileges for everybody else in the mode block. Then you would literally have to be root to get into it. If that happens, su to root, move into the directory, drop out of root, and do everything else with sudo privilege. This is an application, as a matter of self-discipline, upon ourselves of the principle of least privilege. You're going to have to apply that standard to your users to prevent them from gaining more power than they need and doing the kinds of things that users, whether maliciously or ignorantly, tend to do. So you should honestly consider it par for the course, that you have to apply the principle of least privilege to yourself. Do not slap the easy button by doing everything as root, because in the long run that's more risky than it needs to be. It's a bad habit. Do not get into it. So, in sum, I did sudo who am I. Notice I was logged in as Phoenix, but if I do sudo who am I see root. Long story short, pay close attention to what you're doing. Do not use the privilege you have to abuse the power. You need to uphold and respect the privacy of users and earn and maintain their trust. Or on a very bad day, when it's absolutely essential that they must listen to you and take your advice, if you've violated their trust at some point in the past, on that day it will come back to bite you. It may come back to bite you sooner, but Murphy's Law being Murphy's Law, the privilege abuse that you've got going in the background will come back to bite you at the worst possible moment. So that's sudo. Thank you for your attention, and we'll be back.